Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. We're going to continue to work in our mail domain. Specifically right now we're going to talk about IMAP and IMAPS setup. Now, considering that we're going to be using the dovecot package, that pretty much by default out of the box will support the POP3, IMAP, and then their secure equivalents, POP3S and IMAPS, respectively. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and install dovecot, and then we're going to do a little bit of configuration and restart the service and see what we see. One of the things that we'll need to know is what group our postfix user or our postfix account, our postfix process runs as. So if we do a cat real quick on Etsy group and we grep for mail, we'll see there is indeed a mail group that the postfix process is running as. So when we go to define our privileged mail group later, we'll just want to remember that it is mail. Right now we're going to do a yum install on dovecot, and it should install all of the dependencies and the dovecot process. Now, once it's installed, we're not going to start it up right away because we need to do a couple of things to our configuration. So it should have created, along with the installation, a dovecot directory, which it looks like it has. And then there's things that you might expect to see. There's a dovecot configuration file and a conf.d. So the first thing that we want to do is we need to add a couple of lines to the configuration.d and then a mail configuration file. So let's go into conf.d, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of stuff, but what we're concerned about is the configuration for mail. So if we do a vim on 10-mail.configuration, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. What we want to do is we want to look at the mail location first of all. So let's look at mail location. And our mail location, you can see, is defined as where the mailboxes are going to be on our system. And it doesn't appear that it is currently defined. Our mail location is not currently defined. So again, when you're making a configuration, you want to be sure that you're not ultimately breaking an existing or default configuration by simply including a configuration item by default. So we're going to say a mail location is equal to in the mailbox format, mbox format, we're going to say in the user's home directory in the mail directory. So user's home directory in the mail directory, and that our inbox is equal to /var/mail, and then a % in U basically means the name of the user. So there's going to create a directory in var mail for each user that the mail is delivered to. And then the mailbox file for that user is actually going to be in the user's home directory in a directory called mail. So that's the first configuration that we want to look at. And then the second one is what we looked at earlier, which is we want to make sure that the mail privileged group is defined. So if we escape here and do a search for mail privileged, and make sure you spell it right or it won't do any good to search for it, group, and you will see that there's a reference for it here, but there's nothing configured. So we'll go ahead and add it here, and we'll say mail privileged group, and that's why we looked up the mail user before, or the mail group before, to know how our privileges are set for postfix. So once we do that, we can go ahead and save the directory, or save the file to our directory. And one of the things that we can look at is we can look at the home directory, and in the user directory, we'll see that there's no mail directory that's been created, but I haven't started the service yet. Let's also look and see, is there a var mail directory? There is, and there is a var mail directory for each of the users because postfix has been configured, but postfix doesn't know to send the mail to the mail directory as part of the IMAP configuration. So there's a couple of things that we want to do before we try to start the service here. Let's go back to our etc and dovecot directory, and you'll remember that there's a dovecot.configuration file. So we want to go ahead and add a couple of things to the dovecot configuration file. So let's edit that. And we want to define the protocols that are going to be supported from within our mail server. So let's do a protocols equal, and we'll see that there's a couple of different references, but it looks like nothing has been set. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and define the protocols that we want to use. And those protocols in our case are going to be IMAP and POP3. We can also configure IMAPS and POP3S if we want to by simply listing them here. IMAPS, POP3S. Now those particular protocols are available to us for listening for mail connections using IMAP. So now we can save that. We also want to go back to our configuration.d file. We want to make sure that the certificates that are necessary are installed and configured in from within our configuration. So if we look in our conf.d directory, what we should see is that there's a dovecot certificates. There should be a public and a private SSL certificate and key. Now, if your installation is a CentOS installation, the dovecot directory that is generally created for the certificates doesn't exist, but there is an equivalent. So if we look at, for example, our etc pki dovecot directory, we'll see that we have a certs and a private configuration file. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that when we point our SSL configuration to the certs and the private directory that we use the right one. If you want, you can copy these locally. They're generally in a certs or a private directory in your primary configuration directory for dovecot, but newer versions of dovecot are trying to remove those certificates and put them in a centralized location, which is this etc pki directory. If you were using CentOS 6, you would see them in the etc dovecot directory. So back in our etc dovecot directory, what we want to do is go to the conf.d file directory, and there's a file in there called 10-SSL. So let's do vim 10-SSL configuration, and you'll see that these certificates match where they've been installed. Now, if you've copied them somewhere else or you've updated them from somewhere else, you need to make sure that both the certificate directory and the key directory are listing the newest versions of the certificate and key for each one. In this case, if we had copied them, we could simply change it, for example, to etc dovecot private and certs. We didn't do that here. I just wanted to point out that you need to know where these certificates are, especially if you update them. So once we've got that done, then all we have to do is restart dovecot and verify that it listens on the ports for IMAP, IMAPS, POP3, and POP3S. And we can do that with a systemctl dovecot start, or systemctl start dovecot. If we've made any configuration errors here, it should tell us. We'll do a psaux. We'll grep for dov to be running, which it is. And we can check to see if it happens to be listening on any particular ports by doing a netstat-nptlu, I believe, and then we'll grep for dov. And we see that dovecot is indeed listening on the expected ports, which in our case would be 110, 143, 993, and 995. So that's right here, that's POP3, IMAP, IMAP over SSL or IMAPS, and POP3 over SSL, which is POP3S. Now that it's started, if we look at the home directory for user, for example, once we get an email, that should then create the mbox directory, which would contain our emails. So in our next video, we're going to be taking a look at how to set up a mail client and then test the sending and receiving of mail to this server. But for setting up IMAP and IMAPS, in addition to POP3 and POP3S, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.